The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Captain Alicia stepped out of her car. She adjusted her navy blue uniform jacket and checked her watch. 15 minutes early, just like always. After spending the last 3 days flying passengers safely across the country, she was looking forward to this meeting. The company had finally agreed to review her new safety protocol proposal, something she'd been working on for months during her off hours. Walking toward the gleaming glass building of Airline's headquarters, Alicia felt a familiar surge of pride. 15 years ago, when she first started as a flight instructor at a small regional airport, she never imagined she'd be here. 4 gold stripes on her shoulders told the story of countless hours in the cockpit, weather emergencies handled with skill, and thousands of passengers brought home safely to their families. The automatic doors whooshed open as she approached the main entrance. The lobby was impressive, marble floors that reflected the overhead lights, modern artwork on the walls, and a reception desk that curved like an airplane wing. Everything about this place screamed success and professionalism. Alicia had been here dozens of times before, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't just another pilot checking in for a routine meeting. Today, she was presenting ideas that could change how the entire industry approached flight safety. She approached the reception desk where a young man in his early 20s sat typing on his computer. His name tag read Kevin, and he had the kind of confident smile that suggested he was still new enough to enjoy his job. Alicia waited patiently as he finished whatever he was working on, her pilot's license and company ID clearly visible on the lanyard around her neck. When Kevin finally looked up, his expression changed immediately. His eyes traveled from her face down to her uniform and back up again, a puzzled frown replacing his professional smile. "Excuse me," he said, his tone suddenly cooler, "but I think you might be in the wrong place. Service deliveries and janitorial staff need to use the entrance around the back of the building." Alicia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Kevin's voice became more assertive, as if he was dealing with someone who was being deliberately difficult. "The service entrance is around back. You can't come through the main lobby dressed like that." The words hit Alicia like turbulence at 30,000 feet, unexpected and jarring. She looked down at her uniform, the same one she'd worn proudly for over a decade. The same uniform that had earned respectful nods from passengers, ground crew, and fellow pilots around the world. The same uniform that represented years of training, countless hours of study, and a level of responsibility that most people couldn't imagine. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Alicia said, keeping her voice steady despite the confusion swirling in her mind. "I'm Captain Alicia Thompson. I have a 2 o'clock meeting with the executive board." Kevin's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more skeptical. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but pilots don't look like..." He paused, seeming to catch himself before saying something he might regret. "I mean, you're obviously not a real pilot. Nice try with the costume, though." Alicia felt her heart rate increase the same way it did during emergency procedures, but this time it wasn't from professional adrenaline. This was something else entirely. She reached for her lanyard, holding up her credentials so Kevin could see them clearly. "This is my pilot's license," she said, pointing to the official document. "And this is my company identification card. I've been flying for Skyline Airlines for 12 years. Kevin barely glanced at the documents. "Anyone can fake those things." "Security!" he called out, waving toward a uniformed guard who was standing near the elevators. Officer Bradley walked over, his heavy footsteps echoing in the lobby. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, the kind of person who'd probably seen everything during his years in security. "What's the problem here?" he asked. "This woman is trying to impersonate a pilot," Kevin explained, pointing at Alicia as if she were some kind of criminal. "She's got fake IDs and everything, probably trying to get upstairs to steal something or cause trouble." Alicia felt the world tilt slightly, like those moments during flight when you hit unexpected air pockets. "Officer Bradley," she said, reading his name tag. "There's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm Captain Thompson. I fly the morning routes from Denver to Phoenix. I've been with this company for 12 years, and I have a scheduled meeting with the board in 20 minutes. Bradley looked at her documents, actually taking the time to examine them properly. For a moment, Alicia thought someone was finally going to listen to reason, but then he handed them back to her with a shake of his head. "These look pretty good," he admitted. "But we've had problems with people trying to sneak into executive meetings before. Corporate espionage, you know. I'm going to need you to step outside while we verify your story." "Verify my story?" Alicia couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "Call the executive office. Call my supervisor. Call anyone in flight operations. They'll tell you exactly who I am." "Ma'am, I need you to calm down," Bradley said, his tone becoming more authoritative. "The more you argue, the more suspicious this looks. Now I can either escort you outside nicely, or we can make this difficult." "What's it going to be?" Alicia looked around the lobby, hoping someone else might step in to help resolve this ridiculous situation. A few employees had stopped to watch the commotion. She recognized some of them, people she'd nodded to in the hallways, shared elevators, even had conversations with in the break room. But none of them stepped forward to vouch for her. They just stared, some with curiosity, others with the kind of uncomfortable expressions people get when they witness something awkward, but don't know how to help. "This is absolutely unbelievable," Alicia said, but she could see that arguing wasn't going to solve anything. "Fine. I'll wait outside. But I want you to call Executive Assistant Patricia Williams right now and tell her that Captain Alicia Thompson is being prevented from attending her scheduled meeting. She's expecting me." Bradley nodded, though Alicia wasn't sure if he was actually planning to make the call. "We'll get this sorted out," he said, guiding her toward the door with a gentle but firm pressure on her arm. As the glass doors closed, behind her, Alicia found herself standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, where she'd worked for more than a decade. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, but she felt cold inside. Cars passed by on the street, people walked past on their way to lunch meetings, and life continued as normal while she stood there in her pilot's uniform, locked out of her own workplace. She pulled out her phone and saw 3 missed calls from Patricia Williams, the executive assistant who had scheduled today's meeting. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Board is ready for you. Conference room B. Where are you?" Alicia looked up at the building, its glass facade reflecting the sky like the windscreen of her aircraft. Somewhere up there, important people were waiting to hear her ideas about making air travel safer for everyone. Ideas that could save lives and prevent accidents. But here she was, standing on the sidewalk, treated like a stranger, in the place she'd called her professional home for over a decade. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was trusted to fly million-dollar aircraft through storms and navigate complex air traffic control instructions, but she couldn't be trusted to walk through the front door of her own company's headquarters. Standing on the sidewalk, Alicia felt like she was living in some kind of bizarre dream. She checked her phone again. 2:15 p.m. The meeting had already started without her. She could picture the boardroom upstairs, filled with executives in expensive suits, probably wondering where she was. Patricia Williams had sent 2 more texts asking about her location. A group of junior pilots walked past her toward the building entrance. She recognized them from the crew lounge, fresh-faced young men who'd just finished their training programs. They were laughing about something, their new uniforms still crisp and unwrinkled. As they approached the glass doors, Alicia watched Kevin at the reception desk. His face lit up with a welcoming smile as he waved them through without even asking for identification. "Hey, Captain Thompson," one of the junior pilots called out as he noticed her standing there. "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be in your meeting?" Before Alicia could answer, Officer Bradley appeared at the entrance. "She's not allowed inside right now," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We're still verifying her credentials." The young pilot looked confused. "Verifying? But she's been flying our routes for years. She trained half the guys in our department." Bradley shrugged. "Company policy. Can't be too careful these days." Alicia watched as embarrassment washed over the junior pilot's face. He wanted to help. She could see it. But he also didn't want to cause trouble for himself. After an awkward moment, he mumbled something about being late for his own meeting and hurried inside with his colleagues. The minutes crawled by like hours. Alicia had flown through thunderstorms that felt less stressful than standing on this sidewalk. Every few minutes, someone she knew would walk past. Some nodded awkwardly, others pretended not to see her. A few looked genuinely confused about why she was standing outside, but none of them stopped to ask if she needed help. At 2:30, her phone rang. It was Patricia Williams. "Alicia, where are you? The board has been waiting, and they're starting to get impatient. Mr. Henderson keeps checking his watch. Patricia, I'm standing outside the building. Security won't let me in. They think I'm impersonating a pilot." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That can't be right. You've been to this building dozens of times. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm looking at the front door right now and I can't get past the reception desk. Hold on, let me call down there. While she waited, Alicia noticed people were starting to stare. Office workers on their lunch breaks walked by, some doing double takes when they saw a uniformed pilot standing alone on the street. She heard whispered conversations. Why is that pilot just standing there? Maybe she got fired or something. Looks like she's waiting for someone. A delivery truck pulled up and the driver hopped out with a stack of packages. Alicia watched as he walked straight to the service entrance Kevin had mentioned earlier, the one she'd been told to use. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had more education, training, and responsibility than most people in that building, yet she was being treated like she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed with another call from Patricia. "Alicia, I just spoke to reception. They insist you never showed up for your meeting. Kevin says no one matching your description has been to the front desk today." Alicia felt her blood pressure rising. "Patricia, I'm literally standing 50 feet from Kevin right now. I can see him through the glass. We had a conversation 20 minutes ago. This is very strange. Let me come down and sort this out myself. Thank you. I'll be right here on the sidewalk where they left me." As she ended the call, Alicia noticed a news crew setting up across the street. They were covering some story about the city's new transportation initiatives, but their camera operator kept glancing in her direction. She realized how this must look. A black woman in a pilot's uniform standing alone outside a corporate building, clearly not being allowed inside. The optics were terrible and getting worse by the minute. At 2:45, she saw Patricia Williams emerge from the elevator and walk quickly toward the reception desk. Even through the glass, Alicia could see the heated conversation that followed. Patricia was gesturing emphatically while Kevin shook his head repeatedly. Officer Bradley joined the conversation, and all three of them kept looking out at Alicia through the windows. Finally, Patricia pushed through the front doors and walked over to where Alicia was standing. "I am so sorry," Patricia said, her face flushed with embarrassment. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Kevin insists he's never seen you before, even though I told him you've attended at least a dozen meetings in this building." "What did Officer Bradley say?" "He claims you couldn't produce proper identification, which I know is impossible because I've seen your credentials myself." Alicia held up her lanyard again. "Same ID I've carried for 12 years. Same license I've shown airport security hundreds of times. Same uniform I wear to work every single day." Patricia shook her head in disgust. "The board is getting restless. Mr. Henderson actually suggested we reschedule because he assumed you weren't taking the meeting seriously. I had to convince them to wait a few more minutes." "How long have I been out here now?" Patricia checked her watch. "Almost 45 minutes. 45 minutes. In that time, Alicia could have completed a pre-flight check, taxied to the runway, and been halfway to her destination. Instead, she'd been standing on a sidewalk, being treated like a criminal for the crime of wearing her own uniform. More employees were leaving the building for late lunch breaks. Some of them were people from the flight operations department, mechanics, ground crew supervisors, and administrative staff who knew her well. But when they saw her standing outside with Patricia, they seemed to sense that something serious was happening and gave them space. "You know what the worst part is?" Alicia said, watching another group of pilots walk freely through the front entrance. "I've been thinking about this presentation for months. These safety protocols could prevent accidents. They could save lives. But instead of discussing how to make flying safer, I'm standing out here proving I'm qualified to exist in my own workplace." Patricia looked genuinely upset. I'm going to file a complaint about this. Kevin and Bradley both. This is discrimination, plain and simple. I appreciate that, Patricia, but right now I just want to get to my meeting. The board has already been waiting almost an hour. You're right. Let me escort you inside personally. If anyone tries to stop us, they'll have to go through me. As they walked toward the entrance, Alicia felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that she would finally be able to present her work, but frustration that it had taken someone else's intervention to get her into her own company's building. She thought about all the times she'd walked through those doors without a second thought, never imagining that one day she'd be treated like an intruder. The automatic doors opened with their familiar whoosh, and Kevin looked up from his desk with surprise as Patricia marched purposefully toward the elevators with Alicia beside her. "Wait," Kevin called out. "She still can't—" Patricia turned around with a look that could have frozen jet fuel. "She most certainly can, and she will, and we're going to have a very serious conversation about this later." As the elevator doors closed behind them, Alicia finally allowed herself to breathe normally for the first time in almost an hour. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like it took forever. Patricia kept apologizing under her breath while Alicia stood quietly, her mind racing. What had just happened downstairs wasn't just embarrassing, it was a wake-up call. She'd been working for this company for 12 years, believing that her skills and professionalism spoke for themselves. But apparently, some people only saw what they expected to see. As the elevator doors opened on the 20th floor, Alicia made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't just going to present her safety protocols anymore. She was going to tell the complete truth about what this company was really like for people who looked like her. The executive conference room was exactly as intimidating as always. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and a massive mahogany table dominated the space. 6 board members sat around it, all men in expensive suits, checking their phones and looking impatient. At the head of the table sat CEO Richard Henderson, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. "Captain Thompson," Henderson said without looking up from his tablet, "you're nearly an hour late. We were beginning to think you weren't serious about this presentation." Patricia stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson, there was an incident downstairs that—" Henderson waved her off. "That's fine, Patricia. You can go. Captain Thompson, you have 15 minutes. We're already behind schedule." As Patricia left and closed the door behind her, Alicia looked around the room at the 6 most powerful people in the company. These were the people who made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. Today, she was going to give them information they definitely weren't expecting. "Gentlemen," Alicia began, setting her presentation materials on the table, "before we discuss flight safety, I need to tell you what happened to me in your lobby an hour ago." Henderson frowned. "Captain Thompson, we're here to discuss your safety proposal, not personal issues. This is directly related to safety, sir. You see, safety in aviation depends on clear communication, proper procedures, and trusting qualified personnel. But what happens when those same principles break down in your own building?" She had their attention now. Alicia opened her laptop and pulled up a presentation she'd been working on for months. Not the safety protocols they were expecting, but something much more comprehensive. "An hour ago, I was told to wait outside because your reception staff didn't believe I was qualified to be in this building. Despite showing my pilot's license, company ID, and meeting confirmation, I was escorted to the sidewalk and left there for 45 minutes. Board member David Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "That sounds like a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Alicia interrupted, clicking to her first slide. "It was a pattern, and I have documentation to prove it." The screen behind her lit up with a detailed timeline. 3 months ago, Captain Lisa Chen was questioned at the crew entrance by security, who insisted she couldn't possibly be flying the international routes. 2 months ago, Captain Roberto Silva was asked to show additional identification at the hotel shuttle because the driver didn't believe he was pilot material. Last month, Captain Keisha Washington was seated in the back of the employee shuttle bus and told that management sits up front. Henderson's expression was changing from impatience to concern. "How do you have this information?" Because they told me about it, sir. Over coffee, during layovers, and quiet conversations in the crew lounge. See, when you're one of the few people who doesn't fit the traditional image of what a pilot looks, like you start paying attention to patterns. Alicia clicked to the next slide, which showed employee demographics. Skyline Airlines employs 847 pilots. Of those, 23 are women. Only 11 are people of color. And the experiences I just described? They're not isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a much bigger problem. The room had gone completely silent. Board member Thomas Kim was taking notes, while others stared at the data on the screen. Now, you might be wondering why I'm bringing this up in a meeting about safety. Protocols, Alicia continued. It's because the same biases that led to me being kicked out of your lobby this afternoon are creating safety risks that you don't even realize exist. She pulled up her next slide. Communication failures in aviation, a case study. Last year, during a flight from Chicago to Miami, my co-pilot noticed an unusual vibration in the left engine. He reported it to ground control, but they dismissed his concerns because he had what they called a heavy accent. We had to declare an emergency and divert to Atlanta. The engine failure could have been catastrophic if we hadn't caught it early. Henderson leaned forward. Why wasn't this incident reported up the chain? It was, sir. But it was classified as a minor mechanical issue rather than a communication failure. Nobody wanted to admit that ground control's bias nearly caused a disaster. Alicia could see she had their complete attention now. She clicked to a slide, titled, The Real Cost of Bias. Gentlemen, I've spent the last 6 months documenting incidents like this. Times when qualified personnel were dismissed, ignored, or treated differently because they didn't match expectations. And in every single case, it created safety risks, communication problems, or operational inefficiencies. She showed them data she'd compiled from incident reports, employee surveys, and her own observations. Did you know that pilots who don't fit the traditional demographic are 40% more likely to have their safety concerns questioned by ground staff? Or that maintenance issues reported by female pilots take an average of 20% longer to be addressed? Board member Michael Foster was looking genuinely alarmed. These statistics, and where did you get them? I compiled them myself, using incident reports that are already in your system. I just connected dots that nobody else was looking for. Alicia moved to her final slides, which outlined a comprehensive plan that went far beyond the safety protocols she'd originally come to discuss. Here's what I'm proposing. First, we implement the new safety procedures I developed. They'll prevent the kind of engine failure I mentioned earlier. But more importantly, we address the human factors that create these problems in the first place. She outlined a complete overhaul of company culture, mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and addressing bias, new protocols for how safety concerns are reported and handled, and a system for tracking and addressing discrimination incidents. The training program I'm suggesting isn't just about being nice to people. It's about operational safety. When your ground crew trusts your pilots regardless of what they look like, planes get serviced properly. When your security staff can recognize their own employees, you don't waste executive time on meetings that start an hour late. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Captain Thompson, what you're describing, this would require a significant investment. Training programs, policy changes, oversight systems. Yes, sir, it would. But let me ask you this. What's the cost of not doing it? Alicia pulled up her final slide, a legal analysis she'd prepared with the help of an employment attorney friend. Every incident I've documented represents potential legal liability. Discrimination lawsuits, safety violations, wrongful termination, claims. The legal department might want to review this, but I estimate the company's current exposure at somewhere between $50 and $75 million. The room erupted in murmurs. Board members were leaning over to whisper to each other, and Henderson looked like he'd been hit by lightning. Furthermore, Alicia continued, I have statements from 43 employees who've experienced similar treatment to what happened to me today. Some have already consulted with attorneys. She closed her laptop and looked around the table. Gentlemen, you have a choice. You can implement these changes voluntarily, starting immediately, and position Skyline Airlines as an industry leader in both safety and workplace equity. Or you can wait for the lawsuits to start filing and try to explain to your shareholders why you ignored a problem that your own employee brought directly to your attention. The silence in the room was deafening. These men, who were used to making decisions about routes and revenue, were now facing a decision that could define the future of their entire company. How long do we have to make this decision? Henderson asked quietly. Alicia picked up her materials and stood to leave. I'll give you 48 hours, the same amount of time I spent standing on your sidewalk, just extended a bit. The boardroom felt like the inside of a pressure cooker after Alicia finished speaking. Henderson sat back in his leather chair, his face pale as he processed what he'd just heard. The other board members were exchanging worried glances, some frantically taking notes, others reaching for their phones to start damage control conversations that hadn't even been authorized yet. Captain Thompson, Henderson said slowly, these are very serious allegations you're making. Alicia remained, standing, her presentation materials neatly stacked in front of her. They're not allegations, sir, they're documented facts. Every incident I mentioned is backed up by written reports, witness statements, or recorded communications. Board member Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. Even if what you're saying is true, implementing the kind of changes you're talking about would cost millions of dollars. We'd need approval from shareholders, budget restructuring, complete policy overhauls. And how much do you think a discrimination lawsuit costs? Alicia asked calmly. Let me save you the research. The average settlement for workplace discrimination in the airline industry is $12 million. That's just for one case. I have documentation for 43 separate incidents. The math hung in the air like turbulence that everyone could feel but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Foster was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to get the legal department on a conference call. Kim had his head in his hands, already calculating the stock price impact if this story went public. Henderson stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city below. Captain Thompson, let's say we wanted to move forward with some version of what you're proposing. What exactly would that look like? Alicia had been hoping for this question. She pulled out a thick folder she'd prepared months ago, long before today's incident had forced her hand. I've developed a comprehensive implementation plan. Phase 1 would begin immediately with mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff, reception, security, ground crew, and flight attendants. She opened the folder and began laying out documents on the conference table. Phase 2 involves updating hiring practices and promotion procedures to eliminate unconscious bias. Phase 3 establishes an independent oversight committee to handle discrimination complaints and ensure they're properly investigated. Thomas Kim looked up from his hands. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Phase 1 can begin within 2 weeks. I've already contacted 3 training companies that specialize in aviation industry bias prevention. Phase 2 would take about 6 months to fully implement. Phase 3 could be operational within 90 days. Henderson turned back from the window. And the cost? Initial training for all staff, $2.3 million. Updated hiring and promotion systems, $800,000. Oversight committee and ongoing monitoring, $500,000 annually. Total first-year cost, approximately $3.6 million. That's a significant investment, Rodriguez said. It's less than what you spend on coffee for the executive floors, Alicia replied without missing a beat. And it's about 75% less than what you'll pay if even 3 of those potential lawsuits go to trial. Board member Williams, who had been quietly reviewing documents throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Captain Thompson, you mentioned you have statements from other employees. How many people are we talking about? Alicia had been dreading this question, but she knew it was coming. 43 employees have provided written statements about discrimination they've experienced. Another 62 have informally shared similar experiences, but haven't yet agreed to put them in writing. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Henderson held up his hand for silence. That's over 100 employees who feel they've been discriminated against. Sir, that's just the people who were willing to talk to me. There are probably others who were too afraid to come forward. Foster looked up from his phone. I just spoke with our head of legal. She wants to review all of your documentation immediately. She also wants to know if any of these employees have already filed complaints with the EEOC or hired attorneys. Alicia reached into her folder and pulled out another set of documents. 17 employees have filed EEOC complaints in the past 2 years. Of those, 12 are still pending investigation. 5 employees have retained legal counsel and are prepared to file lawsuits if this company doesn't take meaningful action. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Henderson's pen tapping against the table. Finally, he spoke. Captain Thompson, what happens if we say no? What happens if we decide that the risks you're describing are acceptable and we choose not to implement your recommendations? Alicia had been preparing for this moment for months, but hearing the question out loud still made her heart race. Then I submit my resignation, effective immediately. Along with my resignation, I'll be filing a formal discrimination complaint with the EEOC, the Department of Transportation, and the Federal Aviation Administration. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. I'll also be providing copies of all my documentation to local news outlets, aviation industry publications, and social media platforms. The story of a senior pilot being locked out of her own company's headquarters will probably generate some interest. Kim looked like he was going to be sick. You're talking about destroying this company's reputation? No, sir. I'm talking about holding this company accountable for its actions. The reputation damage would come from your policies, not from my reporting of them. Henderson sat back down heavily. And if we agree to implement your plan? Then I stay, and I help you turn Skyline Airlines into the kind of company that other airlines want to emulate. Instead of being known as the airline that discriminates against its own pilots, you become known as the industry leader in workplace equality and safety innovation. She pulled out one final document. I've also prepared a timeline for positive publicity, employee testimonials about the changes, industry awards for workplace excellence, recruitment advantages from having a reputation as an inclusive employer. The marketing department could turn this entire situation into a competitive advantage. Foster was back on his phone having what sounded like an urgent conversation with someone in legal. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Our attorneys want to meet with you immediately. They need to understand the full scope of potential legal exposure. I'm happy to meet with them, Alicia said, but only after the board makes a decision about moving forward with the changes I've proposed. I'm not interested in helping your legal team figure out how to minimize damages while continuing the same discriminatory practices. Henderson looked around the table at his fellow board members. They all looked like men who had just realized they were in much deeper trouble than they'd imagined when they'd walked into the meeting an hour ago. Captain Thompson, Henderson said, you've given us a lot to think about. 48 hours seems like a very short timeline for decisions of this magnitude. Sir, I've been thinking about this for months. I've documented incidents, researched solutions, calculated costs, and prepared implementation plans. The only thing that's happening quickly here is your awareness of the problem. The problems themselves have been building for years. She gathered her materials and headed toward the door. I should mention that tomorrow is Friday. If I don't hear from you by Sunday evening, I'll assume you've decided to maintain the status quo. Monday morning, I'll begin implementing my alternative plan. As she reached for the door handle, Rodriguez called out, Captain Thompson, what makes you think we won't just fire you to make this problem go away? Alicia turned back with a slight smile. Because that would be retaliation for reporting discrimination, which would add another federal violation to your legal problems. Plus, firing your most experienced safety expert right after she presented evidence of safety risks would be the kind of decision that makes headlines and attracts federal investigations. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Gentlemen, you have 47 hours and 15 minutes. I suggest you use them wisely. As the door closed behind her, Alicia could hear the eruption of voices from inside the conference room. 6 powerful men who were used to being in control had just discovered they weren't controlling anything at all. Alicia spent Friday and Saturday preparing for either outcome. If the board rejected her proposal, she had resignation letters ready to submit, media contacts lined up, and legal documents prepared for filing. If they accepted, she had detailed implementation plans that could begin immediately, Either way, Monday morning would mark the beginning of a completely different chapter in her career. Saturday evening, she was reviewing safety reports at her kitchen table when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Henderson's direct line, something she'd never seen before in 12 years of working for the company. "Captain Thompson, this is Richard Henderson. I hope I'm not calling too late." Alicia glanced at the clock. It was 8:47 p.m. "Not at all, sir. I assume you're calling with the board's decision?" "I am. We've been in meetings almost constantly since Thursday afternoon. Legal, finance, operations, human resources. Everyone's been involved. We've reviewed every document you provided, consulted with external experts, and run financial projections." Henderson paused, and Alicia could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Captain Thompson, the board has voted unanimously to implement your recommendations. All of them." Alicia felt her heart skip a beat. She'd been prepared for either answer, but somehow hearing yes still caught her off guard. "All of them? Every single recommendation in your proposal, the training programs, the policy changes, the oversight committee, everything. We're also creating a new position, Vice President of Safety and Equity Operations. We'd like to offer that position to you." The promotion was unexpected. Alicia had been fighting just to be heard, not for a corner office. "Mr. Henderson, I appreciate the offer, but I want to make sure we're clear about something. This isn't about me getting promoted. This is about fixing systemic problems that affect hundreds of your employees." "I understand that completely. That's exactly why we need you in leadership. You've identified problems that the rest of us couldn't see, and you've developed solutions that none of us could have imagined. We need that perspective at the executive level." Over the next hour, Henderson outlined the complete transformation plan the board had approved. The budget was even larger than what Alicia had requested. They'd allocated $4.2 million for the first year, with ongoing annual funding guaranteed for at least 5 years. Monday morning, Alicia walked through the same glass doors where she'd been humiliated just 4 days earlier. This time, Kevin at the reception desk jumped to his feet the moment he saw her. "Captain Thompson, good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The change in his tone was so dramatic it was almost comical. "Good morning, Kevin. I'm here for the 9 a.m. staff meeting." "Of course. Should I call upstairs to let them know you've arrived?" "That won't be necessary. They're expecting me." As Alicia walked toward the elevators, she noticed Kevin watching her with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Word had clearly gotten around that something significant had happened after Thursday's incident, even if people didn't know the details yet. The elevator took her to the executive floor, but this time she wasn't going to the conference room. She was going to her new office, a spacious corner suite with windows overlooking the runway, where planes she used to fly were taking off and landing. Patricia Williams was waiting with a stack of folders and a huge smile. "Congratulations, Alicia. Vice President Thompson, I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Patricia. And please keep calling me Alicia. The title doesn't change who I am." The first item on her agenda was the all-staff meeting. Henderson had called to announce the changes. Every employee in the building, from executives to security guards to maintenance staff, had been required to attend. The main auditorium was packed. Alicia could see Kevin and Officer Bradley sitting in the middle section, both looking uncomfortable. Near the front, she spotted several of the pilots who had provided statements for her documentation, including Captain Chen and Captain Silva. They gave her encouraging nods as she walked to the front of the room. Henderson took the podium first. "Ladies and gentlemen, last week an incident occurred in our lobby that brought to my attention some serious problems with how we treat our own employees. As a result of that incident and the investigation that followed, we're implementing immediate and comprehensive changes to our workplace policies." He outlined the new training programs, updated hiring practices, and the oversight committee that would handle discrimination complaints. "These changes aren't suggestions or recommendations. They're mandatory policies that will be enforced at every level of this organization." Then Henderson introduced Alicia as the new Vice President of Safety and Equity Operations. The applause was enthusiastic from some sections of the audience, polite from others and notably absent from a few scattered individuals. When Alicia took the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some skeptical, some openly hostile. I know some of you are wondering why we're making such dramatic changes to policies that have been in place for years. Let me explain it simply. Because the old policies weren't working for everyone. She told the story of Thursday afternoon, starting with her arrival for the board meeting and ending with her standing on the sidewalk for 45 minutes. The people who prevented me from entering this building weren't being malicious. They were operating based on assumptions about what a pilot should look like. But those assumptions created a safety risk, a legal liability, and a workplace culture that we can no longer accept. The room was completely silent. Even the people who had seemed hostile were paying attention now. Over the next 6 months, every person in this room will participate in bias awareness training. Not because we think you're bad people, but because we all have unconscious biases that affect our decisions. The goal isn't to make anyone feel guilty about the past. The goal is to prevent future incidents that could hurt our employees and our company. After the meeting, Alicia spent the rest of the day in one-on-one conversations with department heads, outlining specific changes for their teams. The security department would get updated training on recognizing company employees regardless of appearance. Human resources would implement new interview procedures designed to eliminate bias from hiring decisions. The flight operations department would establish new protocols for how safety concerns are reported and investigated. By Friday of her first week as VP, the changes were already visible. Kevin had completed his bias awareness training and was greeting every employee with the same professional courtesy. Officer Bradley had requested additional sessions with the training coordinator to better understand how his assumptions had affected his job performance. But the real test came 2 weeks later when Captain Washington arrived for a meeting with the new oversight committee. She walked through the front lobby in her pilot uniform, and Kevin immediately stood up with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, Captain Washington. How can I assist you today?" "I'm here for the 2 p.m. meeting with the Oversight Committee." "Of course, conference room C on the 15th floor. Would you like me to call up and let them know you've arrived?" "That would be great, thank you." As Captain Washington walked toward the elevators, she caught Alicia's eye. Alicia was standing near the reception desk, observing the interaction, as part of her regular monitoring routine. Washington smiled and mouthed "thank you" before the elevator doors closed. 3 months later, Skyline Airlines was featured on the cover of Aviation Industry magazine as the company that got it right. The article highlighted their comprehensive approach to workplace equity and noted that employee satisfaction scores had increased by 23% since the new policies were implemented. More importantly, the company had avoided what could have been a massive legal and public relations disaster. Instead of defending discrimination lawsuits, they were recruiting top talent from competitors who wanted to work for a company with a reputation for treating all employees fairly. Alicia kept the safety protocols that had started this entire journey, and they were eventually adopted by airlines across the industry. But her greatest achievement wasn't the technical improvements to flight safety. It was proving that one person's courage to speak truth to power could transform an entire organization. Every morning when she walked through those glass doors, Alicia remembered the afternoon she'd been forced to stand on the sidewalk. That memory served as a reminder of how far they'd come, and motivation to ensure that no other employee would ever be treated the way she had been treated. The incident that could have ended her career had instead become the foundation for the most meaningful work she'd ever done.